You stated that our constitution is actually modeled on Western European constitutions and so on. But one distinct difference is that while Western European constitutions always talk about the individual, they talk about the individual and his rights and his duties and so on. Our constitution has made the conscious choice of looking at communities, legislating for communities rather than individuals. Since you mentioned the religious control of government control of religious places, there is Article 30 that you know, which explicitly states minorities. So, don't you think this kind of making laws or making rules on the basis of community affiliation actually cements those identities that you are trying to transcend in the first place? So in that case, it's completely inaccurate to describe the constitution as something that aids transcendence, when it actually enforces, all these communal identities, including caste by birth, which it has set out to eliminate ostensibly.
When I said this, the constitution is founded on some of the Western ideas and individual liberty, I don't think there's a dichotomy between individual liberty and group rights. And even some of the Western European constitutions today, this issue is an issue which is receiving attention, and different constitutions are talking about it. You look at what happened in the countries which got recently liberated from the erstwhile USSR. If you look at those constitutions, they are looking at both these aspects, the individual liberty. Then you go to US South African constitution. So the individual liberty point of view, which essentially was a product of the early 1940s idea of post UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then we travel from that in the next couple of decades, and we have the civil and political economic rights, social and cultural rights covenants. And we travel more and more into all these aspects of community protections, community rights, minority rights, and so on and so forth. It is not that therefore that these dimensions have not been looked into by the rest of the constitution, or that the Indian constitution has focused only on individuals. I did not mean to say that. When I wanted to say the idea of a constitution, I'm not talking about the rights which are given under the constitution. The idea of a constitution is built on this, namely a revulsion from the fact that power can be used to subordinate, oppress, and subjugate on the ground of religion. And then when that idea must be abandoned forever, then you look at what kind of rights people may possess, must possess, and must necessarily have. That's a different kind of line of inquiry. And in that, if history has, in different parts of the world, people live in communities practicing faiths, language, religion, etc., then that essential identity cannot be completely negated. Therefore, you have a group right, you have a right of a section. Even in Article 25, it says, 25 and 26, it talks about the rights of denominations and sections thereof. So the word concept of section thereof is also essentially a product of the Indian understanding of Sampradaya. So the sections thereof, you will look at how it really came in. So these kind of debates have very important for us to understand that there is no dichotomy. We have created a dichotomy between individual rights and community rights or group rights. Because on the one hand, if you say the rights under Article 29 and 30 are placed on a higher pedestal, and then you look at it from a wrong point of view. And if you look at all those cases we decided under Article 29 and 30, and the common perception is minority institutions have higher rights than other set of people, which is a wrong perception. So if, as a minority, practicing a particular religion, I must use all possible tools and instruments available to me as free, practice and free faith to ensure that I carry on with my minority as an identity, then there is nothing wrong about it. But the moment you try to use that as a tool or an instrument for, let's say, entering into propagation and conversion using religion as a facade or a mask, then you have a problem. That is where some problems have come in. Therefore, I don't find a dichotomy between an individual right and that the Constitution has decidedly used 29 and 30 in a very wide way. But the way it has been used, if there is a perception of being wrongly used, then either the perception must be corrected if it's wrong, or the foundations for the perception, if they are wrong, they must be corrected. That's how I look at it.
Sir, you talked a lot about constitutional values. Sir, the basic question that continuously haunts me as a law student, that on what premise we are building these values, because our constitution is a borrowed document. That's why we call it bunch of borrowing. And I'm glad that you have mentioned that church and state separation issue. Sir, in British Parliament, they have reserved seat for Christian clergymen. So in India, if you see that premise of church and state separation, we have gone far too beyond in the obsession of copying that construct, and so I don't see a lot there. Our constitutional, when you talked about constitutional values, the constitution is a borrowed document. So we are building our value system on a borrowed document.
Let me correct you straight away. When you said the constitution as ideas which are the product of a Western experience, I did not say it is a borrowed document, right? Don't let us not proceed on those lines. Today, this document has become part of our life. We have transfigured the contents of this document by our own experience and the practice of the Constitution. So, by saying that it's a borrowed document, we're not doing good to the Constitution, right? For that part, let me complete. For that matter, the very idea of a constitution as it exists today in different parts of the world must have come only from the European experience. So Japan did not think of a constitution in this manner, not China. Therefore, let us not talk about it from again a denigrating angle. The idea of a constitution is important for us. Much more than the structure. The idea is important for us. If that idea tells us some invaluable lessons for shaping our social order, I think let us live with that idea.
Sir, my intention is not to denigrate it, but before talking about constitutional values, at least first we have to address the basic question that from where, on what premises we are drawing this value system. That's my point. I'm not. My intention is not.
Which value system are you talking about? I say the Constitution itself is a fundamental value, right? When you talk of values, what exactly do you mean? We use them very, very loosely. In very ordinary language, in legal language, in courts, we use so many words so loosely without giving precise, content. We say constitutional morality, constitutional values. So values essentially mean those principles of life which on moral or ethical foundations are good or important, and they make a difference to our life. Therefore, they are ethical, moral values, they call them. Otherwise, the word value does not have an independent sense and significance. So when you talk of constitutional value, what do you mean? The guarantees, the freedom that have been granted under the Constitution, and the distribution of power under the Constitution, right? And then ultimately, that there is an institution called the Supreme Court of India, which will say that if your rights are imperiled, look, I'll come to your rescue. That's an important constitutional value. So therefore, values in the constitutional structure means those principles and statements and norms which are essential for the integrity of the Constitution.
Sir, considering the present undercurrent in the Supreme Court, how strong is the case for freeing temples? Considering it's a direct infringement of Article 14, it's neither equal protection of laws or equality before law. So I just want to get your opinion on that. How is the judiciary currently, going to take this if it comes up?
There's a interesting study done by some Cambridge scholars on the control of temples in Tamil Nadu, state control of temples in Tamil Nadu. And if you go to any high court, maybe in Madras High Court or some of the high courts, you will find the general perceptions of judges is that it is good that the temples remain under the control of government, because it is doing a lot of good to the way temples are being managed. That's a general perception among judges and lawyers. Why is that it happened like that? And we go back in history. The colonial empire thought fit that the Hindu temples, which are so numerous in India, and with all their wealth, you find all over the country, particularly in the southern part of the country, where the temples are not only monumental, and the kings have taken enough care, the temples are managed with sufficient, support and sustenance, meaning thereby land and other wealth. So when the British colonial empire thought that we must put our hand into it for one good reason, there are also chronicles written that because Many of the temples are being mismanaged. Let us take over the control and ensure that there is no mismanagement. Therefore, these two things have come in very handy. The huge wealth and empire available along with the Hindu temples, and the so-called mismanagement touted by the colonial empire to enter into management of Hindu temples. So it is more than 100 years old history. So probably somewhere from 1850 onwards, you have had the control of temples in our country. So, but then if this perception has to change, then it is not enough to say that, look here, as far as the rest of the other religions are concerned, other institutions are concerned, there is no state control. And why are you talking about, then why can't we talk about violation of equality right? I think that's a very narrow, myopic view of looking at it. So if there is a need for wresting away state control of the Hindu religious institutions, on what better foundations they can be made? That's the most important questions to be asked. So it's one thing to easily say to argue in the court that for logical, legal, constitutional reasons, the control is bad, the control is wrong, the control is pervasive. Therefore, either you say you have a limited control, you can argue for all kinds of things. But more importantly for me is to dismantle the dialogue on the basis of which the control thesis has been propagated. See, the control thesis must be dismantled. How do we go about it? So we must build a better, sound, saner alternatives into why the control is no longer required. So when you go to a court, people say, look at what happened in Vaishnava Devi. But for state control, this institution would not have come the way it has come. But then one forgets how, in the past, when the kings built huge monumental temples in South India, right? They did not directly interfere in the affairs of the temples. They did it from a distance. So doing it from a distance is one thing, from doing it entirely from complete control. So all these arguments are there. So let us look at it, in a different perspective. Yes.
With due respect, and apologies, I did come in a little later in your talk, but just catching on to what you had said about how the country is actually held together and everybody understands the Constitution and the values that it stands for. But I would beg to differ there. I believe that there is such a large mass of illiterate or semi-literate people, and even among those who are educated, there is really insufficient understanding of the Constitution. Our school civics itself, barely touches on things which are, so we do not have much of an understanding of the Constitution. And I certainly do believe that extremely peace-loving Hindus who actually live with great peace and equanimity with people of other religions are not really going by any constitutional postulate or any other thing. They are actually going with the thing of live and let live. And I will actually like to point out in this regard a recent experience, a very recent, a couple of days ago when the CAB thing happened and the lady who works in my house and cooks for me. So you do understand Hindi, I hope so I can say. So she said in the evening when she came to me, she said, Didi, ये सब बातें कर रहे हैं ऐसे ये हुआ ये क्या हुआ अमित शाह जी ने कुछ कहा संसद में क्या? So she's not illiterate. She has gone up till standard 10 in her village, right? So she's not illiterate. So क्या हुआ exactly kind of thing. So I explained the whole thing to her. And when I explained the whole thing कि क्या हुआ from 1947 and ये हुआ 19, she actually said पर उनको रहने ही क्यों दिया? As in Muslims. जब उन्होंने देश मांगा तो उनको रहने ही क्यों दिया? So when I had to get into the nitty-gritties and explain कि this is this and this is our constitution and we give the freedom and the other countries don't. So then she's asking, then why do we give? This is actually a conversation which happened 2 days ago. फिर हम क्यों दे रहे हैं? फिर हमें अपना रखना चाहिए. She's a very peace-loving reason. I'm just giving as a small example. And this is how millions and millions of people are out there. I do not believe that it is a constitution which anyone has, hardly even read, even educated people. I do believe that the country has stayed largely peaceful and without much of civic unrest because the majority is Hindu. I do believe there are others like me. Thank you.
Let me respond to you. When I said the idea of a constitution has sunk in the psyche of the people, what are those ideas of a constitution just sunk in the psyche of the people? Because when you go around with the experience of the lawyer is one thing, but when you go out using your lawyer's understanding of the constitution and looking at interacting with people, essentially you get responses like this. So if people generally understand that, look here, I am a peace-loving person and I want peace all around me, what does that mean today? It can come not necessarily through the idea of a constitution, and it does not come through the idea of a constitution. I certainly agree, but it is cemented by the idea of a constitution. If the idea of a constitution does not exist in our country, the constitution does not exist in our country, we can still be peaceful, peace-loving citizens. Peace is neither given to us by the constitution nor can be taken away. Right? Liberty lies in the hearts of human beings. The constitution does not give it, but constitution protects it. The fact that the constitution protects it, and we are part of the whole protection, aspect, that is important. And how do we strengthen that? So therefore, it is not enough that the constitution is, probably it's important for us to understand that to keep the constitution as an isolated, subject, only for lawyers and judges and parliamentarians to talk with. I think we must move away from that. We must move necessarily away from that. The more we move closer to the constitution, in the sense that if my peace is what has been given to me as a human being and as a community and a civilization, I think the constitution in its working, in its experience, in its practical aspects must necessarily internalize it. And how do I get it internalize it? So therefore, the marriage between my understanding of my peace, my freedom, and the wedding of this understanding with the constitution is very important. So if you look at some of the other countries where this experiment is failing, I think it's a revealing experience. So why is it failed in certain other continents? So can it succeed only by appealing repeatedly? Let us say, I repeatedly appeal to the fundamental instincts and values of a human mind. I can do that. But beyond a point, I think we become vulnerable. So the vulnerability of the contemporary times, you can hijack the constitution in different directions. You can give a different meaning to the constitution. You can expose it to tensions, but how do we ensure that the constitution is not used, practiced, or hijacked for extraneous reasons? Therefore, it is important for us as ordinary, as the common human beings of a country, that we are wedded to the constitution as an idea. So I have some differences. For instance, when judges talk about constitutional morality, as if it's something other than the common morality. You don't find a morality in the constitution. Like morality is something like a value of ethics you build, right? On some fundamental instincts of human life. So we discover our morality, we discover our ethics and practice them. Constitution does not discover morality, but when judges loosely talk about constitutional morality, they land into problems. So therefore, we must avoid all those issues by engaging in a committed discourse with how this idea of a constitution, which protects all that we stand for and cherish for, which protects it, must be strengthened. If it is not strengthened, then I think it's perhaps we again get into all those uncertain terrains of, regardless of whatever values you may have, the uncertain terrains of the practicing of those values. I'm a little worried about it. I'm concerned about it. As not merely the practicing lawyer, but to look at what has happened in the rest of the world, at what happens to constitutions which caved into internal and external pressures. And that's...
So the constitutions cave in actually because of competing values. And just to take on from where she left off, I actually happened to ask this question to retired Justice Kehar. He was giving a memorial lecture, Shastriji memorial lecture, and talked about secularism and secular values in our constitution. And then as he was passing by, I actually asked him, if India becomes 80% Muslim, will India remain? The point was, will India remain, forget about as a political entity, but it has some value systems which she rightly said are driven because of Hindu value systems, which is why it accommodates all other religions, cultures, sampradayas, everything, which perhaps get embedded into the constitution, like you sort of said, or get cemented by the constitution. But if the demographic changes and the value systems of the majority of the country change, this constitution will cave in. Yes? Should then not the cementing of the constitution be putting the majority values up front, by which I mean that should it not actually give a pedestal to Sanatan Dharma, for example, or the values that are carried in Sanatan Dharma?
You are presenting an antithesis because of a demographic change and what should happen to the profile of the Constitution. I think demographic changes or not, whether they happen or not, unless we first understand that this idea of a Constitution, if it is not strengthened in some of its fundamentals, then demographic changes will become a big challenge for us, which is what's happening today, right? So how do you really want to handle these demographic challenges? So can you handle them by using the Constitution in one direction, right? Because after all, ultimately, you are doing what you are doing by appealing to the authority of the Constitution. Whatever the state does today, it does today only appealing to the authority of the Constitution. It is not doing merely because in my wisdom I want to do it, but your wisdom will be subject to the wisdom of the Constitution. And what is that wisdom of the Constitution? Does it exist independent of our wisdom? There is nothing like a constitutional wisdom independent of our wisdom. But there's something called a constitutional experience, which is nothing but the experience of applying and practicing the Constitution over a period of time, whether the Indian Constitution or the rest of the world. Therefore, how do we really enrich this? Well, on the one hand, we have these huge challenges. There can't be any textbook answers to this question, right? The moment you have a textbook answers or we have answers in one direction, then you will find that it will be hounded by questions in some other direction. So if you are hounded in questions in some other direction, then you have a problem.
Now my appeal to you, with a very ardent appeal, sir, tell me why the state of affairs have come to India, who was supposed to be the best thought things across the world, especially Asia, East and West, gone off to the Europe, and I understand even in America, South and North, our philosophy was there. People believe it, and most religions have borrowed from Indian philosophy.
I'm sure we are not in a drawing room with a pen and ink available to us to erase out what you are talking about. I only can correct certain impressions, and all of us are certainly concerned about the way the deficiencies of human nature all over the world, wherever they are. Let us not say that corruption is a part of Indian civilization. It is just part of any civilization. It's just happening the same way as it's happening in India and the rest of the world. Let us not close our eyes to that. But my question, I remember I asked myself a question when I entered my graduation studies and opening my eyes to a great Indian contemporary thinker called Jiddu Krishnamurti. And I asked myself the question, this world, this cradle of civilizations like India, which has produced so many, storehouses of knowledge and wisdom, why is that we are not actually influenced by it in our everyday life? As a young student, I used to ask myself a question. I am still trying to find an answer to this question. The question, I think, is wrong. Because if, on the one hand, human beings have, out of their shared experiences, have been able to generate systems of beliefs and faiths which are so noble. We have written enormous amount of ennobling literature. We use them and cherish them. On the same side, the social order in which we have evolved over a period of time, whether it is the agricultural social order, a feudal social order, or a capitalist social order, or a post-modern capitalist social order, the social order essentially demands from you certain ways of behavior. So there is a conflict where the social order asks you to behave in one particular way, and your religious faith, etc., commands you to believe in a different way. Therefore, there is an innate conflict. So religions cannot now become alternate social orders. They operate in a different world, different dimension. So if religion can become economics, one can answer this question. But the way we have our social orders, challenges, unless we change them, unless we alter them, fundamentally change and alter them, this question will not be answered. There will continue to be questions. It has nothing to do with Indian civilization and Indian country. That's what I would like to say.
If we look at the United States in 1774, 75, the states had constitutions that they felt weren't working for them. They began a process of changing that took a decade or so. If you look at France, they're on their 13th or 14th constitution. Many times they just throw out what's not working and start over. If people here were to look at it statistically and decide that the current colonial baggage constitution has actually facilitated the genocide of the majority population, statistically, since it was implemented in 1950, and decide that they actually want a constitution for themselves as a people, as a nation, not just a state, but the nation, the 80%, wants its own constitution. Even Burma, not Burma, Bhutan put a constitution recently which very clearly states the identity of the people. How many people here in the room have even read the Indian Constitution? I'm sure you have. You might be the only person. I tried once. It's too big, right? The American one's a few pages. You can read it. So, what is the process actually for just putting a new one that would work for the people rather than oppress them?
See, I don't want to talk like a lawyer. A lawyer answer is very, very quick and simple. But my engagement with the profession and looking at how law comes into the lives of human beings, and how a higher law called the Constitution comes every day into the lives of human beings. And I think there are no, as I said, the textbook answers to this engagement. But what I want to share with my experience as a lawyer is that more and more we begin to engage at different levels of the practice of the Constitution. We do it every day. And it happens, whether you like it or not, it happens with us. But on a more active level, then I ask myself a question every day when I finish an argument in a case and come back home and says, is it necessary for human beings' lives at all? What has happened in the court today? How does it make a difference to anybody's life? So we live our life on the basis of our own innate, intuitive elements of goodness, and then what we want to do good and what we want to avoid. I really sometimes try to search for an answer. They are not easy to come. But then I come back with this conviction that if everything has to be ultimately left to the innate wisdom of each and every individual, and if that source of wisdom is available in all of us, namely the willing to live as a peaceful human being, then there is no problem at all. We have no problem at all. But I understand the way I have studied history and civilizations in different parts of the world. The human mind is not necessarily always and ever a peace-loving mind. The mind is a collaboration of various instincts. So when I recently read that somebody called writing a book called The Better Angels of Nature, The End of Violence. So this author says that 20th century has seen the end of violence in a big way, unlike what happened in the preceding centuries. The proposition is that human beings' proclivity to violence has come down. Maybe largely it is true. The amount of uncertainty of our life, everyday life, every moment of my life, the uncertainty by being exposed to violence at the other person's hand has probably come down because of the social order. But there is an entrenched violence in our life where our freedoms are at peril every moment because I don't have the real choice of leading the life I want to lead the way I want to lead it. So there is, on the whole variety of fronts, there is a structured violence built into our social life. When you use the word violence, not in the physical sense, in a coercion. So we are subject to all kinds of coercions which we cannot certainly overcome. So in this scenario, I just look at the world movements on constitution, constitutional deliberations, rights dialogue, human rights, so on and so forth. I find that there is a failure at different levels of the world level, in different constitutional regimes. Why? Because you look at, I just give an example of what's happened in the American Constitution. So 300 years ago, you framed it, and there are judges in the US Supreme Court who say, I belong to the original school of thought. What the framers thought were the content of the Constitution, the originalists. And somebody says, no, the intentional of the Constitution. And somebody will say, the spirit of the Constitution. So these are all inventions of, again, lawyers and judges to grapple with solutions which probably will not necessarily come to the letter of the Constitution. Therefore, the merging of the human mind with its civilizational urges, as they call them. All of us have civilizational urges. And that civilizational urge ultimately is what? I must have a home, a country, a place, a community, a house which must give me a peace and contentment. And that's a great civilizational urge. And when I have that contentment, I must share it with everybody. So what I want to say is the Constitution in a big way, the Indian Constitution, in a big way is enabling it to do. Let us not put a brake on this. We must push it forward as much as possible. But when you put a question about this demography, etc., let us look at it from a higher angle, right? It's important for a country to manage its own resources, its people, its culture, its civilization, and religion. No doubt about that. Nothing should come in the way of the great treasures of our Indian civilization should to be dismantled or decimated. But then, how do you go about doing it? So when I read into this book on how the Jews are the most persecuted people in the world, at different points of world history, whether it was in the hands of Islam or Christendom or any one of those religions, I was trying to ask myself the question that what is happening today about the CAB or the NRC are the same question. For instance, Berlin, at some point of time, they had a gate which prevented Jews will not enter the Berlin city without a certain authorization. So Jews have all the while become an abominable set of people. So do we want to create a civilization where, I'm not talking about Muslims or Christians or things like that. So it's a very difficult subject for the state to manage. But as wisely as it manages, I think it will be able to ensure that the peace which each individual manages within oneself continues to be managed. But if that is not wisely managed, then we have a great problem somewhere. So it is not again answered, as I said, like 2 + 2 = 4. So perhaps in these cases, it can be 2 + 2 can be 7, I don't know.